Hey guys, and welcome back to today's video. Happy New Year, happy 2020, and what better way to kick off 2020 than by doing a December wrap up. But no joke, January will actually be a month of like reflection on this channel, simply because I'm going to be reflecting on the goals that I made this time last year. Well, the goals that I made for 2019. So we're going to kick it off with a December wrap up. I think this might actually be my last December wrap up, but more on that later. Not like my last December wrap up, my last like monthly wrap up, but yeah, more on that later. But yes, I want to make January a month of reflection, so I'm going to be looking back on the 5 goals that I set myself last year. I have already kicked off this sort of like series with a video on what it was like for me reading sci-fi, so I will link that video up here, and also link it down in the description box below, so you can go and check that out. And then I'll be talking about some of my other reading goals. They won't be as detailed, well, not as detailed, the video won't contain as much as the sci-fi video did, because sci-fi just happened to be the hugest goal that I smashed. The rest will be relatively shorter, but yes, join me for a month of reflection during the month of January. And then yeah, I should also be sharing with you some 2019 reading stats, and then of course my 2020 reading goals, which I'm really excited for. I have sort of planned out, like they're roughly in my head what I want. I definitely sort of know. They don't have to be a certain number, so I might just end up with 2. But yeah, really exciting, and I will share that video with you soon. But for now, we are going to delve into the books that I read in December. In December, I read 8 books. 4 of those books were audiobooks, and they were, of course, all Agatha Christie books. Am I bored of them? I mean, if you'd asked me a week ago, I would have said no, but now I'm getting there. But more on my musings about Poirot and Agatha Christie later. I'm going to delve into the first book that I read in December, or listened to, and that is The Mystery of the Blue Train. In this book, I mean, the formula for all the Agatha Christie books are really the same. There is an incident, we have to find out who's done it. Usually it's a murder. The Mystery of the Blue Train is to do with the murder of an American heiress. She is killed on the train with some rubies stolen, and you're basically trying to find out who murdered her. Of course, there's always a number of people around who have a motive for murdering her. So her sort of current husband, who's soon to be an ex-husband, whom she has sort of made her dad hand over a divorce sort of settlement to him or whatever. Maybe her lover that she's going to meet. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's a whole bunch of other people, except it's never who you expect. Well, actually no, that's the thing with horror cases. Usually the person you see first is the person it is, but, and I'm trying to get this not confused with the TV adaptations I've been watching, but you kind of don't think it could ever be them. So the mystery is always there in the air about who it is, and it just unfolds as to who killed her, why, is there a sort of another issue going on at the same time that might be the reason why she was killed. Was she just killed because she was super annoying? We don't know. In this story there's also another character who basically acts as our Hastings. Poirot is travelling somewhere, I don't know, for some reason he doesn't actually have Hastings, or this might be the time when Hastings is in South America, but he comes across another lady who is actually able to act as sort of his sounding board in a way, and she seems a bit more intellectual than Hastings, and she actually plays a major role in sort of uncovering the murder. Like, I think without her, Poirot might have struggled to have uncovered this and would have had to uncover it in another way. That's the basic premise of the book without giving away who done it. I can't really say anymore. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. I thought it was brilliantly written, and I like the introduction of the new sort of Hastings. She's not the new Hastings, she was just temporary. But I think I more gave this a 4 out of 5 because totally didn't see the killer coming. And sometimes when they reveal who the killer is, you're just like, oh. Whereas this one, I was like, this is a bloody clever story, because in the first chapter there's an introduction of a character that no one knows who he is, and actually I quite had forgotten like that first chapter or that sort of introduction until much later, until it was referenced again, and I was like, ah. So I think the book did a really good way of like sort of confusing the reader, but like not intentionally. If you were actually paying attention and remembering things, you would have got it. So yeah, I thoroughly did enjoy this book. The next book I'm going to speak about is That Reminds Me by Owusu. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. So this, I think, actually came out in November 2019, so it's very recent, and this is the story of like a character K, a Ghanaian boy, and the story is told by relating it to the spider sort of I'm gonna say spider god, no, to Anansi, the spider mythology that's told quite largely in Western Africa, and our main character is basically relating Anansi to events in his life. The story is quite fragmented, and I will come on to like sort of I guess my criticisms of it later, but the story's quite fragmented. So you start off with like sort of this boy K, he's growing up in foster home, he's sort of being bullied in school, then like his parents, his actual parents come to get him, and he's moved quickly into another life, and then you're sort of like honestly just thrown into this whirlwind of events of him growing up, the way he's experiencing school, things to do with his brother, things to do with his family, the environment that he's in, mental health. Like this thing covers so much, it's insane. Well, I mean, it's not insane, it's real life, but it feels like such a whirlwind. You know, I think it's also doing stuff to with his sexuality, and yeah, there's a lot encompassed in this. I think this is really short, so I'm pretty sure it's like only around 100 pages. It's not a very long book in any way, shape or form, and whilst I did enjoy it, I enjoyed the end of it. I enjoyed the end of it because of the sort of realistic portrayal of the depths of mental health, the depths of like self-harm, of self-loathing, and for me it was something I could relate to as someone being born in England, being Ghanaian. There was a lot of, I don't know, relatability in there for me. The reason why I gave this book a 3 out of 5 was because I just, like I said, it's really fragmented, and I get that's probably the style he's going for, but it makes it so hard to read. In the beginning I just wasn't sure what I was reading. I was just reading hoping that I'd be able to sort of find some clarity at some point, and for me the end point was the clarity. I felt like maybe I had gotten used to the style and therefore I found it a little bit better, but thinking about it, I don't actually think that's the case. I just feel like the end had a bit more clarity. Like when I say the end, I don't mean like the last page, I mean like probably like the last 25% of it, whereas the first 75% just felt really rambled and jagged. Like I get that it was trying to capture or relive that sort of whirlwind, that sort of busyness, that lack of understanding from the little boy's perspective, but it was really hard to read. It was just not enjoyable or really that understandable. But overall it's a really interesting look into, you know, depression, self-harm. He is diagnosed with other mental disorders. It's a really interesting look into the sort of help he receives or doesn't receive, and it's the thing I like about this is it's not so detailed because it hasn't got the space for that. Like I think this is like a prose sort of poem sort of thing, so it's, yeah, it's very quick, it's very fast paced, but it made me feel a lot and it made me think a lot, and I want to read books that are sort of closer to this sort of material, this sort of literature, but maybe just not in that style. The next book I'm going to talk about is Peril at End House by Agatha Christie. I gave this a 4 out of 5, and again this was one that I listened to. I really enjoyed this. I thought this one was so bloody clever, and for me, I don't know if I can say this without spoiling it, it's nice to see sort of female masterminds at work basically. This was thoroughly enjoyable. The twists and turns it took, we were on the same journey as Poirot, and it felt amazing. Like it just felt really good, and I guess I'm filled with even more love for this particular book because I had recently started watching the ITV Poirot adaptations, and I've seen that one of it now, and I loved it even more, but I've given the rating for the book before that because I thought it was fantastic. In this book, Poirot and Hastings are in Cornwall, and they stumble across a woman called Nick Buckley, and she mentions that, you know, in the past 3 days, like there have been like 3 incidents of like attempts of her life, and Poirot finds this really interesting, and they are sitting, this is like one of the opening chapters, they are sitting in a cafe and she's like, oh, these wasps, and then Poirot notices that it's actually a bullet. Oh, the lighting has changed. He notices it's actually a bullet, and then he's in fear for her life, and basically the case unravels from there. And what's just beautiful about this is the friends that she has. Her friend Freddie, who you don't really know, there's something up with her, there's things she does that you're just a bit like, are you okay? Her cousin, the 2 other guys in her gang, like there are a foursome of friends, and the 2 other people there. There's the threat of the of Freddie's ex-husband, who is sort of lurking in the distance. There's a talk of another guy who has gone missing on a flight. He's flying somewhere, not like he's in a domestic flight or anything like that. There are so many like other backstories going on, like in terms of like the group that they are. There's just multiple stories in this, and I think the way that it unfolds is wonderful. It unfolds in such a nice way, and obviously like comes undone really nicely, but again, it's something that no one would have been able to spot except Poirot. But it comes undone nicely with all the lovely little side stories, and I thought it was just really evenly paced. The suspense was there, and honestly, again, like I said, I don't think anyone ever figure out what Poirot, but you never felt like you were being duped, basically. I feel like with a lot of Agatha Christie books, some of the things are there in front of you, and I'm never trying to look out to be like, who is the murderer? I'm always wanting it to be a pleasant read, and that's exactly what it was. It was a pleasant read, and it was exciting. So many little things just kept happening, and you were just like, what? None of this makes sense. So when you find out who the murderer is, you're just like, oh, right. The next book I'm going to talk about is also another Agatha Christie audiobook, and that is Lord Edgware Dies. Lord Edgware Dies wasn't one of my favourites, but it had the ending that I haven't seen in any of the Agatha Christie novels. And by the way, I am listening to the novels in order of publication. So it had something in it that I haven't seen in any of the ones I've seen so far. But it's basically the murderer writing to Poirot, which is something that hasn't been done before, but it embodies such a sort of like murderous, horrible, calculating spirit, like so self-serving, that I was like, this is brilliant. Like otherwise it would have been a 3 out of 5 for me, but that just knocked it up a star for me. Lord Edgware Dies is the murder of Lord Edgware. Lord Edgware's wife Jane is heard bragging that she would love to have him murdered, like, you know, she would love to go there and just shoot him in the head. Apparently because he won't give her a divorce. They have been together for a while, now she wants to get divorced and married to someone else, and he dies. But Jane has a solid alibi. She is seen at a party, people have spoken to her at a party and all that sort of jazz. So who killed Lord Edgware? And of course the mystery goes on. And I think Hastings is back in this one, so Poirot is working with him to unravel who killed Hastings, and when another death happened, who killed Lord Edgware, and when another death happened, who killed that person. Essentially a little circus, everyone's running around, who bloody killed Lord Edgware. Like, he wasn't a nice man, so this man actually had a lot of enemies, so for this one it was quite interesting, whereas with Peril and House it wasn't the case that this person had a lot of enemies. But in the murderer on the blue train, or the mystery on the blue train, she as well didn't have a lot of enemies. So this one you're just like, it could be anyone. But again, Poirot finds out our murderer, which I think in this one was very, very clever. I think in this one, if you did read it and, like, you know, really pay attention to the clues, actually you would find out who did it. This one seemed to be very straightforward, and I kind of like that, but then it was the ending that really topped it off for me. The next book I'm going to speak about is Sight by Jessie Greengrass. I borrowed this from a library, so I don't have a copy, but I absolutely love this book, and I have put it on my Scoped apps in my saved thing so that I can listen to it later, because honestly I really enjoyed it. Sight is a book that I think is really hard to encapsulate what it's actually about, but I would start off by saying that it's a book about like pregnancy, motherhood, being a parent, but then it also has a section where it's talking about sort of X-rays, modern technology, the sort of development of cesarean sections and actually cutting into people and finding out what happened to the body during pregnancy and things like that. It's about the overall sense of when you become a parent, or about your sort of approaching that journey of becoming a parent, like, who are you and who are you after that? Sight takes place from the view of an unnamed narrator. She's talking about her marriage to her husband named Johannes, and she's also talking about her daughter at the moment and also her unborn child. She also talks about the relationship between her and her mother, as well as her and her grandmother, and her mother and her grandmother. The story has different timelines, so it will have one paragraph where she's sort of in the present and the next she's talking in the past. There's no sort of evident divide for this. You just have to read and then sort of place yourself in the relevant place. But through doing this, she manages to talk to us about her mother's illness, the occupation that her grandmother had, and how all of these things had an effect on her. This book is also set in London, which is really nice. There's a lot of talk of the Wellcome Library, which is like along Euston. I don't think I've actually ever been there, and just other museums and things that are in London as well. When I say the book flips between different timelines, it's also sort of intersected with paragraphs on medical history, and not in the history sort of boring way that it might be written, but in ways that, I don't know, she's talking about like the first sort of the discovery of x-rays, and the different people who discovered them. She's sort of looking back as that narrator on the things that she has found while she's been like in the Wellcome Library, and then so there's a lot of medical history speech in there, and also there's a lot of feature of Sigmund Freud. That's the second half of it. So I'd say the first half is more about the x-rays and these three men who are sort of in with that when they sort of open up a woman who has died with her baby inside of her, and they sort of discover the human body, well, the female body, and then the sort of second half when it's doing more interchanging between the paragraphs. That section is later focused on Sigmund Freud, his discoveries, but also his daughter. I think her name is Anna. So it's weaved in with that. So essentially what you'll get is a paragraph of her in the present day, talking about something to do with motherhood or how she's feeling at the moment of being pregnant. Then we'll flip back to like the discovery of the x-ray. Then we'll come to another paragraph where we're now like maybe back in her life, but we're like sort of at a summer that she spent at her grandma's house, and that is how the novel goes. It's not confusing at all because when you're reading it, it's very easy to follow. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the pacing of it, the style of the writing. It was very easy to absorb, but there was also a lot of food for thought there. I will say that the book, I feel like, always seemed to create a sense of foreboding. You always kind of felt like there was something like waiting for you around the corner, but I also felt like there was a lot of chapters where she talked about spending summers at her nan's house, and the way that she would talk about time and the way it stretched, it felt so real to me. Maybe because I had a lot of summers like that where they just felt like they stretched on for years, for centuries even, and I feel like she managed to really capture that sort of like languid summer when you're just alone by yourself. She really managed to capture that. I think most importantly what I liked about this book was her confusion of motherhood and, you know, whether or not she should be a mother, and does she have what it takes to be a mother. Is the fact that most people change when they become parents like a good thing? Like, should that change have already come from them, from wanting to change as themselves, rather than they have now changed because they are dependent, they are responsible for someone else? I just liked the confusion that she had at motherhood. I feel like the questions she sort of posed are definitely the questions that like I will feel, and like a lot of them are questions that I feel anyway about like other people who are mothers, so I thought that was really interesting. However, one thing I couldn't stand about this book was the x-ray and Sigmund Freud bits. I understand why they were there. They provided very good history and context, and our narrator, that was what her interests were, and I can see as a whole what we're thinking about the book, and you know, about motherhood and who we are, why these parts are so relevant. But honestly, I found them a little bit dull. I will say though, the story, I think his name's like John C. Hunter, of him performing the C-section and the guy who drew the images, I thought the way that was described and just talked about, I feel like that's such an important part of history, obviously, and I don't know, I'm glad that I sort of read that and I know that, because these were like huge medical breakthroughs, but overall could have done without. I don't have the book anymore, as I mentioned, because I borrowed it from the library, but there were just so many pages that I took pictures of, and if I had the book, so many pages I would have underlined. I've written down here in my notes, like in particular, I liked when our narrator talked about sponging her daughter's face. She says she sees the outline of her mother's hands beneath hers, and as it goes through the ritual of water and clean cloth. And she's talking about how she, as she is sponging her daughter's face, she can see her own mother's hand sponging her face. And I thought there was just this beautiful sort of circle that was coming through, and you know, just this repetition of how she has become the person she is, and she's very aware of all the different like lives her mother and her grandmother had led to get to this point. So yes, overall a stunning book. I can't wait to listen to this as an audiobook on Scribd, but yeah, also I can't wait to actually buy my own copy because I really love the book that much. I'm going to go out and buy it. I have decided to leave this video here for today. There are 3 more books that I need to talk about, so that's 3 Acts Tragedy by Agatha Christie that I listened to on audiobooks, Adults by Emma Jane Unsworth, and 3 Little Lies, and I cannot remember the author of that one. The other 2 books were ebooks and they were NetGalley books. I will leave a link down below to my reviews of those two books, because I would have reviewed them on Goodreads, or at least on NetGalley anyway, and at another time I will talk about those three. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in another one. Bye!